Well, why don't we begin? So this week we'll be wrapping up our look at Dubliners. We have two more stories to read. One of them we'll be looking at today. That's Evelyn. And the last one you'll be reading tonight and we'll talk about tomorrow. That's A Painful Case. So on Wednesday, we'll do review for our quiz. On Thursday, we'll have our quiz on Dubliners. How that's going to work is I'm going to give you a few options. Each option will consist of two stories and a theme. And then your task will then to be explain how that theme shows up in those two stories and compare and contrast them. For example, look at the sisters and encounter how does the theme of paralysis show up in those two stories. It'll be something like that. You'll have the whole period to respond, although I would say don't think of this like some long essay. Should be about like type a page. Should be more like the character motive paragraph. One paragraph, two paragraphs. That's all I'm really looking for with this, just to show your understanding and that you have some original ideas about the stories. Okay, so that'll be in class on Thursday, review for that on Wednesday. And then, of course, your book club essays are due today, so make sure you go upload them if you haven't yet. I think that's it. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is a while back, I had told you guys that I don't mind if you go in and revise any of those homework assignments, like the practice exercises. Maybe if you were here, maybe you remember that. But for the practice exercises, if you lost points, you could go back in, correct them with my feedback, re-upload them. One thing I realized last week is that I don't get updates if you do that. So if you do ever go back in and revise, just email me to let me know. Otherwise, I'll have no way of knowing that you resubmitted. Okay. That being said, why don't we get started here? So today we're going to be looking at Evelyn, looking at that theme of paralysis that we've been examining all throughout this unit. Evelyn, I think, is personally my favorite story of the bunch we're reading. It's the most, I think, emotionally impactful, not as technically dense as something like Araby, but more I think, more moving. So we'll look at Evelyn. It's also one of the shortest stories that we'll read. And I want to just give you a chunk of time in class for you to read that on your own. You didn't have to read it over the weekend. So what you can do is open up Canvas or your books if you have them and find Evelyn. It's the fourth story. As you're reading through this, just to make sure that you are following along and know what's going on, I put together 5 questions for you to answer, because even though it's short, it's still Joyce. So there's a lot that's unsaid. Remember the idea of nomen from the sisters. What's unsaid or what's missing is just as, if not more important than what is said. So in Canvas, there are these Evelyn questions. There are 5 of them. As you're reading or after you're reading, you could address these. What you could do is copy and paste these into a Word doc and then answer underneath, or just answer them in the text box in Canvas. A sentence or two is fine for these, as long as you are attempting to answer them, and in the ballpark here, you'll get credit. But these should help, and they'll lead into a discussion that we'll have at the end of the period. So I'll give you, say, around 20 minutes or so. Hey, long time no see. Like the hair. Sorry, the old student walked by. Yeah, read these. I'll give you about 20 minutes, and then we'll check in and chat about what we found at the end of the period. Any questions? And yeah, you'll be able to use the stories during the quiz. Okay, guys, let's start chatting about this. We don't have to go through every single question systematically, but they could be the basis of our discussion. Let me ask first about your general impressions. So what stood out to you about the story? Any gut reactions to share? Yes, Emma, what did you notice?
Compared to all the other stories, we kind of know the narrator, the main character's name, instead of it being anonymous.
Good, yeah. So this is where we could start some of the differences between this and the other three stories. So you'll remember that I said, the Dubliners is broken up into sections based on age, and so there's childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and then community. Uh, this is the first story in the adolescent phase. One of the ways that Joyce marks that there's a shift is by actually telling us the narrator's name. In what other ways did you see this as different than the previous three stories? Here's a hint. In the very first sentence, we see that Joyce is writing here in a different mode. Okay, how's the first sentence different? Even the first word is a hint. I think I heard someone say it. Karina, you have your hand up. What's different here?
She's the first like focus of a story that is a girl.
Oh yeah, I mean that's not what I was thinking of, but that's true. This is the first time that we have a female protagonist here, but also it's in third person. All the other stories have been told for like really closely from the perspective of the protagonist. So we're getting some like distance here from the main character. It's not as focused on the interior experiences. Um, and those stories were largely based on the shattering of illusions. This one, not so much, although there's a decent amount of illusion as well, the illusion with an eye. So the first question that comes up that you worked on was asking about the second paragraph and how there's a contrast that's established here between the way Evelyn's life used to be and what it's like now. Okay, so what do we learn about her from the opening? What's her life like now? How is it different than it was in the past? Great, Kendall.
She was able to have fun and play with the other kids and just be a kid herself.
Mm-hmm. Good. She describes her past as kind of happy and joyful, all the neighborhood kids playing outside. You might be reminded of an encounter here where all the kids are outside playing. Also, Araby describes a bunch of kids outside playing in the cold. But now life's kind of dreary. We know that her father was not so bad then, implying that her father is bad now. So there's problems there. Her mother was alive back then. So one parent's dead, father's getting worse, these other people are dead. So she's looking back at the past as a time when like things were still good. But now the opening kind of sets the tone. She sat at the window watching the evening invade the avenue. She's kind of staring at the window, things are gloomy, and she's literally watching her life go by, right? Stuck in her home, right? You can note the description of her home as well. Home, she emphasizes. She looked around her room, reviewing all the familiar objects which she had dusted once a week for so many years, wondering where on earth all the dust came from. There's this emphasis on dust, and we saw dust come up again uh, up here. The curtains smell dusty, are dusty. And so, like, what's her home like it's stale, it's boring, it's drab, and this is almost like a prison for her. At least until things start looking up when she meets someone named Frank. So tell me about Frank. What's the deal with him? Emmett, tell me about Frank.
Eveline meets Frank in town, and Frank is like a sailor who came to Eveline's hometown to just visit and vacation, and he plans to go back to Buenos Aires.
Great, yeah. So Frank is a strapping sailor. He's kind, manly, open-hearted. They quickly fall in love. And if Evelyn's the one who stays at home and never gets away, Frank, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. He goes everywhere. He's been around the world. They fall in love, and he wants to take her to, the other side of the world, Buenos Aires, live in South America together. You couldn't think of a more dramatic departure from boring life in urban Dublin. Okay. So things seem to be looking up for her. They plan on leaving together, but that brings us to the ending of the story. What happens? Where is the paralysis here? Yeah, Joy.
It's right at the end when she's about to get out.
Sorry, a little louder. Mhm. Yeah, great. Well put. This is, I think, what's so heart-wrenching about this story. You know that she can get out and she'll have a better life, in Buenos Aires, like living with her husband, being happy, and she can't do it. She can't get on the boat. And it's a sort of cinematic scene where Frank is being pushed up with the crowd onto the boat. She's still standing on the dock. He's calling out to him, and she's just standing there, frozen. And it's like, well, why isn't she going on? And it ends. Her eyes gave him no sign of love or farewell or recognition. And there's really that moment of paralysis where she's just not only not moving, but she seems emotionally immobile as well, just totally uncaring and numb. So part of the story is just unraveling why this is. Why doesn't she get on the boat with him? What's holding her back? This speaks to the last question, and there are, I think, a few explanations here. So why doesn't she get on the boat? What are your theories? What are you thinking, Kendall?
I think she's kind of scared. Like, she doesn't want to leave this life of that she already knows, that she knows everything that goes on, and she doesn't really want to take a risk of possibly not liking her new life.
Yeah, good. I think she does come off as kind of like a deer in headlights here, frozen in reaction to a threat. And her home, even though it's stale and dusty and boring, it's familiar, right? And so she's really trying to expand her horizons, and that can be scary. What about you, Joy? Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I like your point about how she's just like almost out of practice or never learned how to do that, how to like fight for her own happiness. Okay. What complicates this is her relationship with her father and her past thoughts about her mother as well. So like, why does that get in the way? Her father comes home drunk almost every day. She says that things have been getting worse with him. So wouldn't that propel her to leave and get as far away as possible? Yeah, Karina.
I think even though her dad is like not a very good person, I think she kind of, I don't think she's like scared to leave, but I think she actually just like, even though he's bad, would feel bad doing it, because it's not said, but I imagine that because he described that her life was better when her mom was alive, that some of his like issues are coming from that, which she might feel like guilty for or something.
Mhm. Yeah, I think guilt is an operative word here. I mean, think about what her life is like now. It's boring. It's just her dad when he comes home, and it's lonely. And then I think she thinks, well, what's my dad's life going to be like if I go? So he's home all by himself for the rest of his life. She has, one living younger brother who works far away, and so it's just the dad by himself getting drunk every night. So I think to her, it's sort of like abandoning her family as well. And even though the dad's unpleasant, she does have some memories of him being pleasant. Yes, like here, there, she has this memory of when her mother was still alive. They go out on a picnic. She remembers her father putting on her mother's bonnet to make the children laugh. So there are some good parts to your father, and she thinks, well, I don't really want to do this to him. What's he going to do on my own? And wouldn't my mother have wanted me to stay? Wouldn't she have wanted me to stay and take care of the family and fulfill that role? So it's not as easy as just getting up and going. Any other thoughts about why she stays? Or other moments in the story that stood out to you? Okay. I mean, I see the ending almost like a sort of Stockholm syndrome where she's just uh, kind of entranced by her captors. What has captured her is Dublin. So what she's grown up with, it's all she knows. So the idea of doing anything else, even though it might help her, just seems out of reach. And she's kind of her own problem. So it's a new take on paralysis. It's a nice story. I hope you enjoyed it. So we'll wrap up there in the remaining 10 minutes or so in class. You could finish up and submit your questions if you haven't yet. For tonight, please read A Painful Case, the next story. You could also get started on that in the remaining time. But otherwise, that's all for today.